Well, thank you very much. It is really an honor to be here and talk to this group. These are critical positions, and the world is going through some big changes right now in multi industries, and so it's always good to kind of stay up to speed on what the trends are, where things are going, what's happening, and so I'm really glad to be a part of this group and to be able to share a little bit about what my experience has been and to hopefully give some information on how to position yourself or understand your client better or your company better. And so with that, I will start my presentation. Okay, so I wanted to start real dramatic because this is an incredibly interesting time of year. January inauguration coming up, US, the world is changing, and I think we forget when we get bogged down in our day to day of, why do we do the things that we do? And so it's always nice to have a little bit of inspiration. So I thought this vehicle would be kind of inspiring. And, I want to talk about, my presentation is largely going to be based on my experience in dealing with German companies that came to the Southeast. And so, and mostly automotive and aerospace. So a little bit about, let's see, I'll take this off. Let's see if I can get it to scroll. Oh, there we go. Okay, just a little bit about me. I was a Vanderbilt graduate, undergraduate degree in German, and then I went to the Cumberland School of Law in Birmingham, Alabama, and I graduated in '93. And what's interesting about that is literally the same month that I found out that I passed the bar in Alabama, Mercedes had announced that they were going to be building cars in Alabama. And I think I was the only German speaking attorney in the entire state of Alabama. So I got to see from the very front row kind of that story unfold. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. But that was a very, you always wonder how you get to places, in your career. And this was a, transformative moment when Mercedes announced that they were going to be building cars in Alabama. And keep in mind, nothing with a wheel on it had been built in Alabama before this announcement. So it was quite a shock to the workforce and the political structure and other things. So I'm also the managing partner of the EU executives in the US. So we are headquartered in Germany. We are at about, I don't know, Toby, maybe 30 consultants, 30 partners now, and in multi-countries. We're in Austria, South Africa, France, and growing. So we work a lot in cross-border transactions and cross-border advising. So we've been doing this for a long time and have, excuse my cursor. Okay. So generally what I'm going to talk about is positioning yourself in an international company or for an international company. And after doing this for about 25 years, like Art just said, I learned sort of 4 basic tenets that I wanted to share with you today. The first one is everything is the same until it's not. And so since I come from a legal background and Toby and most of you come from the CFO, finance, accounting background, you have to make decisions every day. And you have to base those decisions on something, either your knowledge of the law or your knowledge of the statutes. But in cross-border transactions, you can't really always trust your intuition. So I found that you have to be more open to information coming from the outside that's going to help you make the decisions that you have to make. Because if you go in there and only think about the way you've always done it in your home country, a lot of times you're gonna make a mistake, and those mistakes can be quite costly. And so the first issue that I learned, or the first challenge that I learned with doing this kind of stuff, is to never assume all of the things that you don't know about the communities that you're working in, and the different legal aspects and the different finance aspects, accounting aspects, statutory aspects, and practice aspects that you're going to encounter. What that means is that communication becomes even more important. And again, when you are in a new organization, you're trying to figure out what's the best way of communication. If you have multiple subsidiaries, it's even more difficult because then you have to communicate with different places, maybe even different time zones. So you have to really focus on improving that communication so that everybody's on the same page and traveling in the same direction. And mostly what we find is companies are looking for individuals who first can understand and identify these differences, right? Because, the general rule is international work is usually twice, if not three times harder, and cost twice, if not three times more than domestic work. And so it is literally like pushing the boulder up the hill even further than you would have in your traditional US based company. So they're looking for people who first have to get it, where the decision making and challenges lie, and then be able to navigate through those. So I'm going to talk briefly about three amazing stories that I happen to be a part of. Well, the third one is kind of still in process, but the first two I was very heavily involved in, and that's Mercedes, Airbus, and VW. And they are interesting because Mercedes and Airbus both came to Alabama. So in 1993, like I said, literally the same month that I found out I passed the bar, Mercedes decided to pick Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And at the end, it came down to Nebraska and Alabama. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what the decision making looked like in Germany at the board level so that they were able to make that decision and enter the US very, very successfully. The first thing they considered was BMW had already beat them to the punch. They had been in South Carolina for 2 years and they were making models for the US. So typically what happens is a German company will enter the US market when their US sales are high enough that they need that product made in the US because they just can't keep up with the volume. And so, back in those days, the SUVs, and I don't know, how old everybody is on the call, but back in those days, SUVs were just becoming increasingly popular. That's when the Ford Explorer first came out. That's when the Jeep Grand Cherokee came out. And it was literally one of the most popular new models in the American market that we have ever seen. And so, the Germans, who are not really SUV people, they were thinking, I wonder what's up with this whole SUV thing. And so we better have a model for specifically for the US and then see what happens. So they were watching the stories unfold with Jeep and Ford, and they had really no product that could compete with that. And their US market obviously was a huge market for them. So they were trying to figure out what are they going to do with this trend in the industry. The factors that they considered, and this is, and Toby will appreciate this, the quality. The first hurdle that the Germans had to get over was, can we in Alabama, for example, make a car at the same level of quality as they do in Stuttgart, Germany? And that was tough for them because German education system's different, German training is different. Everything about how manufacturing is done in Europe is different than in the US. And they were very, very concerned about, could we find a workforce in Alabama that could create the high level products that they wanted. And I'll tell you just a funny story. In one of the last final discussions with the Germans and the Alabamians, the question was asked, how do we know that your Alabama workforce can produce a high quality product from German engineers? And so one guy from Alabama said, well, back in a couple of years ago, we produced rockets in Huntsville for your German engineers, and we did pretty good with those. So I think we can handle your cars. And the German loved it. He thought that was great because, that was obviously Werner von Braun. And so they said, yeah, that's a really good point. And that's when they decided, okay, we're gonna move forward with the Alabama. The other thing, and this is a whole topic of a presentation on its own, is cost and pricing, right? So huge topics that a finance person has to decide. What is the price point going to be? What is the supply chain going to be? How does all that work together? How much are we going to charge for this vehicle? If we bring it back to Europe, how much are we going to charge for the vehicle back there? This is literally such a giant topic. It is impossible to cover here, but I'm sure most of you understand, how important that is, how difficult these determinations have to be. And so I think that's one of the areas, if you are going to shine in an interview for a position like this, having a deep understanding of cost and pricing in an international market is very, very important. And so I can't, like I said, I won't have time to cover it today, but that's going to be one of those giant issues that I think you need to become an expert at. Marketing and timeline. So, what typically happens in the Mercedes world was, Mercedes made the decision. And so they went back to their supply chain and they said, okay, here's the list of suppliers. All of you guys need to be in Tuscaloosa, Alabama and up and operational within 18 months. And some of these companies spoke no English, had no idea about the US legal system. had no interest in coming to America, but if they wanted to continue to supply Mercedes and they were on that list, it didn't really matter. They were coming to Alabama. So you had this wave after wave after wave of suppliers that had to set up, right around the Mercedes campus. And so that was really challenging. And like I said, I never actually worked directly for Mercedes because they already had service providers out of New Jersey. But what I did work with a lot was the suppliers that came over because they had no idea, had never been to anywhere Alabama, and now they had to set up and be operational within about 18 to 24 months. So there was a ton of pressure on them. And then while they were setting up their factories, how are they going to do marketing? How are they going to, phase in certain things? And so there was just a lot going on. And I think that's another one of those areas that, when you have a domestic project, it's already pretty stressful, but then you overlay this entire new structure, this new legal system, metrics versus the American system, lots and lots of differences that, people just forget about or take for granted when it's a domestic product or project versus an international project. So the marketing, the timeline, that creates another layer of stress on your company that you have to be able to deal with. And what's interesting is, you're over here in America trying to put all this together as maybe the expat CEO or COO, and then you're trying to explain all this back to the home country, board level management, and they really don't understand it because they're not there. They're not seeing what you're seeing and encountering everything that you're encountering. So again, this communication got all weird because they were saying, well, here's what's going on over here. And sometimes the board in Germany would be like, what? That doesn't even make any sense. Like, what are you talking about? So again, if you're going to go into this sector, you have to understand the culture on both sides and have a very, very robust communication flow between what's going on in your site and then what's going on back there. And I saw a lot of really good situations and bad situations result because of that issue. So, okay, so then they came up with the vehicle that they made. And it was interesting because when they first decided to come to the US, they had no idea what they were going to build because, again, they wanted an SUV, but in Germany, nobody really knew what that was. And so they weren't very popular and they certainly weren't mainstream. So they were like, well, let's just figure something out. And this is what they came up with. And so this was the M Class. And it sold in America fully loaded at about, and that was like the M500 for about $50,000 and $50,000 to $55,000, depending on the features. What was interesting is they took this same car and brought it back to Germany and sold it there for 75,000 euro. And at the time, the exchange rate was pretty strong. And so this same car, they were killing it in the European market. And the American market was doing really well, but they were making more money on the European market, and they didn't even know it was going to sell in either market. So they decided on this product, and it ended up being a complete success. And the Mercedes plant in Tuscaloosa at one point was making more money for Mercedes than any of their plants anywhere in Germany because of this product right here. And so, and that's, again, that's this pricing. And I think, Tobias, don't they do like a value added tax when you come over to Germany, like a luxury tax? There's all kinds of tax on products like this. So, and I guess you can talk more about that later, but it's one of those things that you consider what does success look like when you're building a new product? And in this case, they had a great success story in the US selling to the US consumers, but they have an even better success story in Germany. And so the head of this plant, Andreas Rentschler, he became a rock star because of this incredible success story. And he went back over to Germany and he went up through the company and was really, really popular and famous and powerful and all because of this particular decision, which at the time they didn't even really know that they were going to make it and how it was going to go. So if you think about that, you're in a critical decision-making role and you're trying to guide your company through this. And sometimes you get it right, like they did here. Any questions about that? I'm gonna, this is kind of an interactive presentation. We'll have opportunity to ask questions later, but I just wanted to kind of give you a little bit of the background. And so that was the Mercedes story. So the next case study is the Airbus story. And so that was really interesting because, again, and aerospace is more my favorite industry because I fly a ton and I like to, I like the the way the industry unfolds, and it's a very different industry. I mean, automotive and aerospace could not be more different in terms of how they enter the US and how they grow in the US and the politics behind it. And so I'm really I was kind of a big fan of the Airbus story that ended up going to Mobile, Alabama. So what happened with Airbus is that they again realized that they were starting to get more US market share. So pretty much most of the airlines in the US, Delta, United, American, they were buying Boeing aircraft. And so Airbus was creating their products for the European market and other places. They had a plant in Tianjin, China. And so they were creating their products over there. And when they go to the air shows in Paris and Farnborough, which are the big air shows every year for the aerospace industry, they were starting to sell more to the Americans, right? Because Delta at one point said, well, we're not going to buy any European planes. We're going to stick with Boeing. We're an American company. We're loyal to the American brand. We're not going to buy Airbus. But the problem was Boeing planes, and Airbus planes were getting very different because Airbus was really pushing in innovation, engineering. They were better, they were lighter, they were faster. And at some point, you couldn't deny that this was the better product. So they went to the air shows and they started buying Airbus aircraft at the Paris Air Show, at the Farnborough Air Show. And so these orders started to come in. So, and they were being serviced out of two places in Europe, Toulouse, France, and Hamburg, Germany. And Toulouse produces about 75 planes a month, and Hamburg produces about 50 to 55 planes a month. And so at that rate, when they were ordering, like, say, 600 planes at a time. So, you know, an airline, when they place an order, it's a giant order because they're phasing out aircraft and they need to bring the new aircraft in. So these contracts are very large and over a large time period. So they were getting orders and they were thinking, well, we're almost at capacity now. Airbus was saying, we're at capacity now with our two plants in Europe. How in the heck are we going to service these contracts? And of course, we want this business with the US airlines. How are we going to do that? And so the decision was made, we got to be in the US. And, you know, there's other reasons as well, but that was the driver. That's always the driver. And every company that I've ever worked with, once sales get to the point or pressure gets high enough that their customers need you there, you're going to go. So that's kind of what the decision-making process was. And again, they had to go through some internal information and due diligence. And so again, increased sales was the number one driver. Also pressure. So, you know, with the automotive manufacturing, you have just in time, just in sequence. And that's, you know, literally the assembly line, right? You put the car on the assembly line, it runs through the assembly line. Everybody comes to the car, they put stuff on it, and it comes out at the end as a fully finished product. That is not the case with aircraft manufacturing. When you're building a plane, the plane sits there and all the suppliers come to the plane. And it's very slow. And they actually still paint it by hand. Where in automotive painting, you can dunk the car into the pool of paint. There's different high-tech paint shops. With aircraft, they're literally like painting it with the blowgun or whatever. And so there was a lot of pressure because the manufacturing process for aircraft is so much slower. They were like, we're never going to get there. There's no way. I mean, right now, Airbus is about like 7,000 planes on back order from all kinds of airlines all across the world. And so they were under immense pressure from their US market to say, look, you guys have to be able to produce more planes. And so they have to produce them in the US. And then, of course, political concerns. And that's a huge topic right now because, you know, if there are political tariffs or logistics or a pandemic that forces all of your product to sit at the docks and can't get through customs, and, you know, you fill in the blank issues with the logistics process or the supply chain, then, you know, increased sales and pressure from US customers, those are going to drive up and you're going to have more of a mess on your hands. So the more you can put in your local market in terms of manufacturing and fulfilling customers in that market, the better. And that's usually, you know, the last concern is, you know, if we are getting sales in the US and we can produce in the US, how many planes can we produce, or how many cars can we produce, and what's our volume that we need to hit in order to satisfy our customers. So again, you know, pretty straightforward decision making. Very difficult when it comes to the CFO or the CEO or any of the O's that have to then come together and make these decisions. So that's where I think, you know, learning first what the issues are, and then how the decision making is done, and then how you fit into that role, I think is really the purpose of today. Okay, if anybody's interested, I'm kind of an aerospace nerd. So this is a great movie. It's called Airbus versus Boeing, the jumbo jet race. You can find it on YouTube. It's free. It's about 50 minutes. And it literally talks about the history of Boeing and the history of Airbus and how these two companies created the duopoly that we have today. They are the manufacturer for civil aviation, period. I mean, McDonnell Douglas is no longer, Lockheed Martin does mostly defense. So these are when you're flying anywhere as a passenger, you're going to be flying in one of these two companies' aircraft. And I think it's a great movie. If you have any interest at all, I would highly recommend it. And so it's called Airbus versus Boeing, the jumbo jet race. And it really talks also about the culture, because what you're going to see is, remember, you can't trust your intuition. Well, your intuition is largely based on the culture that you're operating in, or maybe that you grew up in. And so it's very interesting to hear like the Boeing executives talk about what happened versus the Airbus executives talk about what happened, and then how that all plays out. So if you're going into the international space, you have to have an understanding of those cultures and how the decision making is done in those cultures, and how to get things done there. So highly recommend this movie if you have any interest at all. Okay. So these are kind of practical things that I've learned about the aerospace industry. So unlike automotive, so typically when an automotive company comes over, they get a lot of incentives. They come over really big. So they're creating at least 1,000 jobs. I think Mercedes is now up to about 5,000 jobs altogether. They're producing 4 products in the plant in Tuscaloosa. And so they come over in a totally different way because they get huge incentives. Alabama gave them free land, and they gave them tax abatements. They gave them workforce abatements. They gave them all kinds of stuff to lure them to Alabama. And so because they create so many jobs. So at the end of the day, most municipalities, most states and local governments will recruit companies and offer them incentives based on how many jobs they create for their constituents. And that's when you see the governors on TV going, hey, we just landed 5,000 new jobs with this brand new project in fill in the blank. And so it's all very exciting, and everybody gets all fired up about that. So the aerospace guys, on the other hand, they like to grow through mergers and acquisitions because usually they are too small. They are spread a little bit too thin because the volumes are not there. When you're making, like right now, the Airbus plant is producing about 8 planes a month. And so at that volume, they don't have to be right there on campus, right? They can be, even if they come to the US, they don't necessarily have to go to Mobile, Alabama. They could maybe go to California. They could maybe go to Boston, Connecticut. They should be in the US, but they don't have to be right next to their OEM. And so unlike automotive, where you literally, if you're a certain type of supplier, when that assembly line cranks up at Mercedes, one of their suppliers might crank up exactly at the same time, because that might be the door that has to come in, or the undercarriage or something. So it's a little bit different, the decision making in the process, because of the manufacturing process. So they expand through M&A, and that presents a whole new set of challenges. As a lawyer, I have not done a ton of M&A work. I'm more on the strategic advising side, but it can be very difficult, and especially with personnel. Who do you bring over? Who do you find locally? What does that look like? How do you build out your new team? What do you pay them? What's their benefits packages look like? There's all kinds of things that come up when you have an M&A situation versus just a green field and you bring your entire team and your entire people with you. So that's one of the things I think that is another really critical issue that you should have an understanding of if you're going to do aerospace specific. Obviously, everyone wants more U.S. business, and that's good because the aerospace guys, they can come over and they can work for Boeing, or they could work for Lockheed, or they could work for other aerospace company, Gulfstream, because they're not captives. So an automotive supplier typically just works for one, like BMW or Mercedes or VW or whatever, because the OEM kind of prevents them from working for other competitors. Aerospace, not so much. They don't like it. I wouldn't say that they're going, yeah, sure, whatever you want to do, go ahead and do it. they just don't prevent it. And so that's why they can get more US business, and they want more US business, because once you've made the investment in the US and you brought your whole team over, and you're usually not at capacity, right? Because you're new, you're a startup essentially. And so you're going to want to do more business development. You're going to want to expand your networks to get more business in, not only the US, but also Canada. There's a huge US aerospace market with the Canadians, and then some in Mexico as well. So they want more US, North American business. The other thing is, again, they're afraid of political factors, which they really don't fully understand. I grew up in Germany as well. My mom's German, my dad's from Alabama. That's why I know the story so well, because I lived it my whole life. I saw how the Germans interact with the Southern Americans, and what the challenges were, if you will, and what they did successfully and what they didn't do so successfully. So I've seen how a lot of the thinking happens. And it's funny, and one of the things I was talking to somebody yesterday about, the problem with Germans is they speak English really well, but the culture is very different. So sometimes I'll be sitting in a meeting and I'll have the American talking and I'll have the German talking, and that they think because they're speaking English that they understand each other. And I know for a fact that neither one has any idea what is actually being communicated, because their thinking is so different. And so, so I guess don't take for granted, just because we speak English, that everybody knows and is on the same page. So I think that's one of those areas that, if you've done this a lot, if you've worked with international business a lot, it's kind of funny. I always like to, tell some funny anecdotes about things that I've seen, when, it's not funny maybe at the time, but later on you look back and you're like, yeah, they had no idea what they were saying. So, and political factors are even worse. So obviously we have a ton of political factors with the aerospace industry. We have regulations with the FAA. We have major politics that you'll see in that movie if you watch it. So I think that's one of those areas that, you don't have to be an expert in it, but you have to know that your client, if let's say you're the CFO of a German subsidiary in the US, your client back in Germany really doesn't understand most likely what you're talking about when it comes to certain factors like, politics and regulation and compliance. So I think that's an area that is really, really critical. Okay. So again, if you talk about incentives, and I don't know if anybody in the audience has done a lot of work with incentives. So a lot of times the municipalities will issue bonds to give these incentives. And so there's, let's say like the Mercedes example, they gave a ton of incentives in terms of tax abatements and tax credits and things like that. So and there's also clawbacks. So one of the things that is very, very difficult is, if the company were to fail and for whatever reason they had to go back, there's a lot of clawbacks that can hit them because of the state and local incentives that they were given. And you, as the finance person, need to be very understanding of that, because it puts another level of diligence on that position to say, look, you don't necessarily want to go, you know what, just didn't work out, let's head back to wherever, home country, because these clawbacks can get pretty nasty. And so you have to have an understanding of how the incentives were placed, who's doing them, what are the parameters, and then before people make rash decisions, I think it's important to understand that these are a very complicated, certainly in the law, a very complicated area in the startup of the international company process. The other thing in aerospace is that because it's a highly regulated industry, they require a very robust balance sheet. So I always use the example, if your car breaks down, you just pull over to the side of the road, you get out, you look around, you open the hood. Well, you can't do that with an airplane. And the FAA knows that. So they have to make sure that you're not cutting corners in your production of your part that's going to go in an airplane that's going to go in the sky with 300 passengers. So the FAA requires, unlike with the automotive suppliers, it requires a very robust balance sheet so that you don't have to cut corners and you're going to be able to service your products appropriately. So that's another thing that puts a little bit more pressure on you as a startup that you have to account for. I don't know what it is like in Germany. I'm sure EASA is the same way, but I know the FAA is very, very vigilant in terms of how much you have to have in reserve to be able to keep up with your compliance. And then there's security concerns. So So I do mostly commercial aviation because if I was going to do defense work, even though Germany is a friendly country, we have treaties, it's one of our allies now, there's still IP concerns and safety concerns because, obviously defense products are different than commercial products. And so I don't do a lot of the defense contracting. I'm probably going to do a little bit more the other way around from America to Germany, but there's going to be protected IP. There's going to be cyber problems, cybersecurity issues, and so that's just something you might want to be familiar with. I don't think it's going to impact your position directly, but I think it can impact some of the budgetary decisions that you might need to make in that regard. So that's just another thing that I've learned over the years that they have to deal with. Okay, and now we get to the third story, which is actually unfolding as we speak, so it's very exciting. So VW, and I'm sure everybody knows VW because there's an Audi stadium right here in DC, and it's funny because there's a Mercedes-Benz stadium in Atlanta, Georgia, where the Falcons play, and there's the Audi stadium here in the DC area. So obviously VW, which owns the Audi brand and lots of other brands, but owns the Audi brand. So VW, which is headquartered right here in Virginia, they just invested $5 billion to buy Rivian. And I don't know who my electric car fans are in the audience, but Rivian was basically failing. It's a fabulous car. I love this car. I think it's beautiful. I think it's really slick. But as a tech startup, it was not. I mean, it was just burning through investment capital like there was no tomorrow, and they were basically on the verge of bankruptcy. And so VW said, well, we don't really have a product that can rival the Tesla, and we need one. And we kind of missed the boat on the whole electric drive thing. So we're going to buy these guys and we're going to put our very significant resources behind it. And so it was actually kind of a really good deal for both because Rivian was able to bring, their technology, which VW didn't have, and now VW is able to bring their infrastructure. So it just literally, they just announced it last year, and it's probably unfolding as we speak. And so I feel like it's going to be probably a lot like the Mercedes M-Class story, where they're going to take the Rivians and build them here, potentially export them back to Germany or Europe, and go head to head with Tesla because Tesla is making big inroads into the European market. So I think this is a really cool story that if, like I said, if you're interested, it's unfolding sort of as we speak. The other thing is Germany is not in a good place right now. This same company, VW, makes it literally historic moment, and you have no idea. They're closing 3 German plants. That is unheard of. That is like riots in the streets. That's like burn things down. That is a very, very major deal. I don't know, how many people have been to Germany or know much about German culture in this regard, but this is a big deal. And VW is such a large company. I think they're still the biggest in the world in terms of automotive. When they move or make a move, people in every industry pay close attention. And so this had shock waves that were sent all through Germany, and there was a lot of fallout from this. And so to me, it's kind of ironic because while they're closing plants in Germany, they've just spent $5 billion to purchase, this EV. And so you're seeing politics on both sides. And I think it's kind of interesting to watch how these big companies, make these kinds of decisions. And then where do you fit in? What value add can you bring to say, okay, I kind of get where you're coming from a business standpoint, from a financial standpoint, from a bottom line standpoint, a cost basis, but still you've got all these other factors that you have to consider. So Germany in general, the economy, and I guess Toby can speak on this a little bit as well, but it's just not in a good place. And they have this election coming up, and they really, the war in the Ukraine has been a nightmare for them, and so they're really in a mess right now, and they're trying to figure out what to do next. So I think it's going to be interesting to watch them go through that. So that leads to the last question or topic is sort of companies, getting married. I call them getting married, getting divorced. And just like that, just like marriages and divorce, the emotions run very high. As you can see, when VW makes a move like that, and there's some other things we'll talk about, but there's culture clashes, political clashes, security concerns, and of course, the lawyers are always going to make a ton of money. So I think it's important to recognize the whole life cycle of your client whenever they first get started, whenever they're ramping up, whenever they have resounding success, like Mercedes did with the M-Class, or when they have epic fails, like when Mercedes tried to merge with Daimler Chrysler. in Michigan, that was an epic fail. And so, it's just a mess. And it can be great, it can be not so great. So you really need to know, what you're dealing with. And going back to what I said earlier, everything's the same until it's not. And that's where you value add. That's where you have to know what you're doing, and you have to be able to access resources that can help you understand very quickly in order to help your clients, be successful in navigating some of these challenges. Strangers in a strange land. It's funny. I'm really half German, half American. So when I'm in Germany, sometimes I'm like way too American to be fully German, and when I'm in America, sometimes I feel like I'm way too German to be fully American. So it's just an interesting, dichotomy with how the individuals that are making these decisions and running these companies operate when they're in different cultures. And so, and it does. It's how you make decisions when you have success, and how you make decisions when you have failure, and how good and how bad can it get. Well, this is kind of funny. Daimler calls it quits with Chrysler. 9 years after they exchanged vows in a vast, extravagantly orchestrated news conference, Daimler Chrysler signed their divorce papers Monday at a sparsely attended briefing in a nondescript auditorium at a Mercedes factory. So, it's even the same language that people are using. So I think, the point of all of this is, as you kind of develop your strategy of what do I want to do with my career, like where are my strengths and how can I help my clients, navigate some of these very, very interesting and difficult challenges, where is my information coming from, and how am I going to, fill those roles. So just a little bit about EO. Again, we're executive search, retained executive search, and we pride ourselves on filling those mission critical positions. And these really are the roles that determine everything about your company. I hope you see with these 3 examples that I gave you, it's everything. It's your success, it's your failure, it's how to get out of a bad situation, it's how to maximize a good situation, it's making decisions for the next 100 years, it's deciding, what my role is and how can I communicate that to all of my subsidiaries or all of my teammates. And so one of the things that we've done, I think, in our company is really work together as a team to identify and kind of step back and get that 30,000-foot view and help our clients understand that they're going into a different space and they're going to need different skill sets and different resources. So that's one of the things I really like about our firm. And I'm going to turn it over to Toby here now to talk a little bit more about specific positions. But I think that's kind of what I wanted to share with you guys today is just how the process unfolds and how you might be able to fit into it. Take it away, Toby.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Angela, actually, I had one question when you gave your presentation. Thank you very much. You've been looking into very exciting topics from the past. How do you see the near future for opportunities for German companies coming to the US, and what is what is the, I mean, you're not that sure yet what the US government is going to look like, and what are the abilities are going to be.
Yes.
Do you know what the US market is doing to attracting those companies coming from abroad?
Yes, that's actually an interesting question, because a lot of the incentives, people think, well, is there an economic development or recruitment arm for the United States government? And really, President Obama was the first president that ever even put one of those together. Normally, it's the states that recruit. So it's going to be Alabama versus Kentucky versus Tennessee. And so the United States as a government didn't do anything in terms of recruiting. They offered no incentives, and they did nothing in terms of getting new jobs or new companies coming over. That sort of changed with the Obama administration, but I would say it's still very much state driven. So, and in America, each state has different laws. They have a different workforce. They have lots of things are different. So it kind of depends on which state that you're going to. That's why there's always a competition. When a company in Germany says, I'm looking at the US, every state, if I called right now and said, hey, I got, Joe Schmo company looking at it, the US subsidiary, I'd have 12 states lined up to pitch to get that company. So I think what's going to happen on the political side, and obviously, you know, one thing I love about President Trump, he is a New Yorker. He is a direct guy. He's going to tell you exactly what he wants to do. Whether he can get it done or not is a different story, but you're always going to know where you stand. And so, you know, from what everybody can read in the paper, he wants to have most things that are sold in America made in America. And so anybody who's not producing in America may have some serious challenges. I work with Porsche, and they are one of the few German car companies that are not manufactured in the US. And I've already kind of told them they need to really think about it, because those are the kind of companies I think he's going to target. They could be in the US. They choose not to be in the US. I think he's going to punish them with tariffs. That's just my opinion, but I think that's what he's gone on the record to do. He's very US centric. And anybody who decides to come over, I think will then be rewarded in terms of, you know, he's going to get behind them and really support them. So that's a little oversimplification, but that's my sense of what's going to
happen. Excellent. Thank you. Let's hope that it's going to happen vice versa, and
yes.
U.S. companies.
And Germany needs to encourage U.S. companies to come over to Germany, because it's even more frightening for the U.S. because they can't speak German. At least the Germans can somewhat speak English. Very few Americans can speak German, so it's even worse when the Americans come to Germany.
Okay, then let me just briefly take over here. I'm gonna.
Oh, yeah, let me stop sharing. There we go. Okay.
My screen. Let's see. Here we go. That's the presentation. All right. Can you see my screen, everybody? I believe so. Okay. Great. Well, thank you very much for having me as well. Good afternoon or good morning for you. My day is already sort of ending. Typical dark winter weather, and I'm adding to Art, who made a brief introduction, that I'm actually born in Berlin, but I'm living with the family in Heidelberg, which is a beautiful little cozy town about an hour south from Frankfurt, so rather central position within Germany. And yeah, that's for me. I'm yeah, glad to be here, to be given the chance to talk a little bit. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to touch on the role of the CFO, and point out some differences between Germany or Europe and the US. And as well, obviously, this is a topic itself you could write books about. So I'm just going to be very, very shallow at the top on that topic. And as an executive search consultant doing the job since 2016 now, I am, or we are very focused on knowing the challenges of our customers and knowing the in depth as possible. But as I'm coming from a more service quality orientated background, I'm sure you guys are much more into detail when it comes to really the specialties on several finance topics. And having said that, I have a quick question and would ask you to briefly give a thumbs up in the chat if there's one or someone in the room who is either working for a European or German company, or is maybe currently working from Europe or Germany, just to get a brief understanding if there's people who have that background and might add some to the discussion as well. That would be great. I'm not seeing the chat here. Let me see. Angela, is there some reaction? Oh, there is. Here it is. Okay, excellent. Matthias has been working for a German merchant bank. Okay, great. Well, then I look forward to your input if you have one at one point. Yeah, let me start by briefly touching on a couple fundamentals when it comes to this role of the CFO and the differences. From my experience, we have two different types of CFOs. One who is strongly strategically leading, really going out and being right next to the CEO, and the other type of CFO who is more into the numbers, into the actual operations of the finance department. So having said that, right now, much of the CFO differences are very coming from different standpoints, and you have this direct, let's say, oh, there it goes. Starting with obviously the regulatory compliances and having laws, tariffs, etc., which are very different from the two countries, and here we are, and accounting reporting standards. Obviously, there's a lot coming up in the future with sustainability reporting directives, etc. And we in Germany use the HGB, and now it's lost again, and obviously IFRS. The reporting route of a CFO is oftentimes quite different, as we have, for example, in Germany, the CFO has often a very strong position, just as the CEO. And nowadays, the position becomes even more important. In the US, from what I know, is that the CEO is usually on the very top of the company, and the CFO and the other O's are below the CEO. And in Germany, it is mostly that the CFO is on the same reporting level and reports directly to the board. So that's one difference. And then obviously the responsibilities are different. The different legal forms in Germany and the US. In Germany, it's very common that the CFO as well has the HR and sometimes even the IT department underneath his department. And what I mentioned before, often the CFO has a strong responsibility in the strategy of the company as well. So yeah, the decision-making power is something that I briefly touched on. It's not staying here. I hope it stays now. And is pretty much, correct me if I'm wrong, but in Germany, the CFO is I believe more strong in terms of decision-making power than in the US, and he has as I said, direct route to the board and as well to external stakeholders, and is equal to the CEO. And then what you touched as well, Angela, in terms of culture and communication, obviously there's quite some differences, but I believe by now Germans and US companies understand each other much better, and as well as long as you are aware these differences, communication becomes much easier. So in Germany, you obviously can have a good time at any time if you have your communication partner going to not only when going to the Oktoberfest or to a beer garden, but yeah, this is something still having to focus on very much. Now a bit of I'm touching on a bit of common ground and to the both sides of the Atlantic, as we have yeah, almost 100 years ago, we are facing something called the Great Depression, which we don't want to face again. But nowadays, we are more optimistic and call it the Great Transformation. And within that transformation, the CFO is playing an absolutely vital part. And what I briefly mentioned before is that the CFO is probably the one facing the most complex issues within the company and an organization, and that needs to be focused on. And obviously the CEO I'm not talking the CEO role in any way down. It's just as important, but the CFO with all its duties nowadays and in terms of the transformation, it is really important to focus on. So let me just, besides the usual skill set of an CFO, I just want to focus a few that are rather new and that I believe needs to be, or our work needs to be focused on very strongly, as when we fill positions and we need to, you know, look behind the curtain and look into the candidate's mind or the customer's mind as well, and really focus on more the personal nuances of a person and the company, to get the right match. And so let me guide you through this a little bit. Obviously, that's what I just mentioned. The business understanding needs to be way up there to be added by data knowledge, data value, knowing where the data is coming from, knowing how to manage the data. So here nowadays with digital transformation, the CFO definitely must be strong in looking into these technology components. And with that, security comes directly into mind. The topic of risk and security, I must say, is definitely a vital part here as well. And in combination to that, AI and prompting is a skill of not only the CFO, obviously, but is a skill that you should definitely getting into or getting to know, and then seeing what kind of tools, what kind of AI tools can be helpful to my team, to my to reach my my goals as a CFO. So now I'm coming a little bit into the soft skills. These 3 or 4 mentioned before are rather hard skills that can be checked. Now the soft skills are a bit harder to look into from our perspective. For that, we often use as well the different, or a tool of measuring a little bit of the management diagnostics of a person, or as well the needs of a company. So, and here with a lot of experience, you can look into these as well when making the match. Assertiveness and speed. Yeah, this is something that is very important, and there's different personality traits and different people, obviously. If you are someone who is really outgoing, fast thinking, analytical, etc., and can push through certain projects. And here, not every CFO is up to speed for some challenges. But this is something everybody should yeah should have a look into. And I just recently, just today actually, I was talking to my colleague from Austria, and he told me an interesting story. They are right now working with a company that called them, saying that we have difficulties with our CFO. We would like to discuss this with you, and maybe we need your help in finding a new person here. And they met up. My colleague, he brought in a interim CFO. Angela, you had the what do you say in the US for interim management?
It's fractional, but it's not exactly the same, but it's probably closest to a fractional.
Yeah. Fractional, or let's say like a temporary CFO that comes into place when there's fast help needed. So he was sitting with them in a meeting, and they were showing him the numbers, and he directly said, you guys have a problem. You guys have to go to the banks right now. You guys have to drastically cut on your expenses. And they were shocked because the previous CFO was not up to speed, and he was not reporting at the pace and the right numbers as they have needed it. So that was just one example. I mean, obviously, these type of stories come up rather often, but yeah, that's one. And yeah, let's be a bit more nice. Let's be a bit more empathic, and empathy obviously comes quite hard into play these days, as it is extremely important to build a group of well-functioning colleagues around you, and therefore empathy is definitely one to mention, as well as resilience, as we all know, troubling times that we are facing with this transformational phase that we're going through. Always being, relaxed, even though the winds are strong. So, and collaboration and trust. Here, trust as well, from the story I just mentioned. The trust level obviously was not there anymore. And I think like this is a basic really. A CFO or a finance professional must be trustworthy and must be able to collaborate with all kinds of departments. I believe nowadays a CFO is more connected than ever, and needs to open up the radius and be able to collaborate with internal, external stakeholders at any time. And yeah, talking of fun, I want to mention this one as well. You might be a bit irritated why I'm putting up humor. And actually, a FANG call from November got me into that, because there was a call with the FANG chapter of Germany, and they had a professor from the university on strategic management here in Germany, and he was leading a study in terms of CEO humor and how important it is for a C-level leader to be fun to be around, and that this trait actually helps companies or helps teams to grow. I mean, this is he was going really much into detail there. It was quite fun to listen to, but yeah, it's something that we don't focus on that much. I mean, this humor thing, goes close to the empathy topic as well. But this is something that we are really looking into as well when we fill positions, and it's something fun, I believe, to look at too, because not to take everything too serious nowadays is a helpful trait, I believe. Let me mention as well just two little numbers to pull that up into your head right now. One is 68%. 68% of CFOs say the speed of their strategic decision making has increased drastically. 86%. I think that's quite impressive. This comes from an Accenture study from about a year ago. I would be interested to know if we are, discussing a little bit back and forth after my little presentation, if you are having the same feeling that you're, forced to be more speedy in your decision making. And it goes as far that 67% of the surveyed CFOs feel paralyzed at times by the number of decisions and volume of choices they need to make. So this I would just leave it as it is for now and move to the next one, because it everything pretty much comes down to one thing: to be successful and to be able to manage your challenges in a fast manner. And maybe some of you know what I want to focus on now. Exactly. You probably have guessed it. You can only be as good as your team. And when forming a team, all options need to be considered, with using external consultants, using what I said earlier, interim management, and as well, the CFO itself often needs to be replaced on an interim basis to be able to then form a team and then form a new CFO that's coming out of the team. So probably you know exactly how important the team for you is, and now you have obviously all kinds of specialties, and this is what we are focused on as well, is not only looking at the one person when filling a position, and looking at the team that is around it, and to see that all the skill sets and all the needed personality traits, etc., are merging well with each other. And that's that for now. Let's hope for the best, that our economies are sailing strong on these troubled waters, and as Warren Buffett likes to say, only when the tide goes out, you discover who's been swimming naked. I hope everybody has their shorts on. I hope everybody has their team set up. Yeah, if there's any question or any concern, obviously the issues that someone is facing or CFOs are facing these days are very individual and very different from each other. So we are as well trying to look at every situation individually and try to find the best solution at the end. And yeah, as you realized, I sort of like quotes. I'm leaving you with that last quote, which is quite new. History is not deterministic, and the future will be shaped by the choices we all make in the coming years. And with that, I'm ending optimistic, and with this, yeah, to give you or to the Empfehlung. Angela, help me. What is the Empfehlung?
Recommendation.
The recommendation to the book where the quote is coming from. Maybe some of you have read it. Nexus from Yuval Noah Harari. It's definitely, I would say, it's a must read.